Foster leapt to his feet and clawed at the pistol he had stuck behind his belt earlier. He reached for the gun at the small of his back, drawing faster than he ever had. Sometimes real life just played out like a book or movie. Final shootout. The shots crashed together. Jake felt the impact against his chest and went over backward. As he fell, he watched through eyes gone hazy again as Foster stumbled back and forth, trying to stop the blood that fountained from his bullet-torn coat. He couldn't do it, of course, and after a second, the gory stream slowed as his heart began... So stupid.
Keep going.
And after a second, the gory stream slowed as his heart began slowing to its inevitable stop. He fell forward, and the blood began to form a slowly spreading pool under him.
Welcome to the second meeting of St. Balasar University's English Club. I'm your host, Andrew.
And I'm Stallion.
And today we are going to be critiquing a novel-length work submitted to us by William W. Johnstone, Trigger Warning.
Yeah, it's interesting. William, can I call you Will? Will, your name is on the cover, but it's actually Joe that's with us today. Because you are deceased and were deceased at the time this novel was published, is that correct? Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay.
Glad to have cleared that up.
Regardless, a lot of work went into this book. We are looking at would you call this an action-adventure thriller story set in the modern age?
Well, I don't know about you, but I was certainly thrilled.
A thrilling action and adventure, a lot of political commentary.
Yeah, really scathing sort of takes on the political system of today. It's not a thriller, that's very reductionist, it's more of a thought piece.
It definitely has its own thoughts, and Will, we're very glad that you've joined us to be part of this English club.
Oh, and Norman, I'm glad to see you came back as well. It's really great to have you back today. I think that you and Will would actually agree on a lot of things, so you'll have a lot to say to each other.
Okay, so without further ado, let's dive right in.
The premise is that Jake Rivers is a former Army Ranger attending the small and prestigious liberal arts college, Kelton College.
Yep.
Which is in Texas. It's populated mostly by a sort of liberal snowflake student body, and Jake doesn't get along with them very well because he's a real American man.
And it's pretty summed up in the opening scene where he hears this domestic squabble, and it ends up being a boyfriend about to physically assault his girlfriend. The situation gets turned against Jake when the girlfriend accuses him of perpetuating the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And kind of summarizes the way that Jake feels at Kelton, which is no one appreciates his values and people go out of their way to misunderstand him.
Yeah, he really feels victimized. Him as an affluent white straight man feels very victimized at this school.
Whose education is completely funded by his rich grandfather,
right,
who has a massive estate in Texas.
Right. And
he's basically paid for everything in his entire life.
So from there, Jake is continually beset by what he believes are Antifa thugs. Whenever he's out at the campus at night, he is attacked by them, basically. Right. He quickly gets to know Dr. Natalie Burke, a professor of criminal justice, and they fall in love. He takes her on a date. They get to know each other.
They kiss passionately, or they kiss very solidly with the potential for more.
With the potential for more. A big potential, I would say.
With endless opportunities for renewal.
Yeah. And then from there, the novel quickly escalates into a sort of like terrorist siege on the college.
Yep. Quickly, through hopping through a bunch of different people's perspectives, we get to know Cal Granderson, a well-meaning but a little bit overzealous campus cop. We get to know Pierce Connors, who is a student at Kelton College who attends a study group full of other people who share his left-leaning beliefs that he's finding himself not being able to relate to more and more. Chief Frank McCraney, who is the chief of campus police, trying to keep control of the situation from outside. He's later joined by a few agents of the FBI who basically just exist to keep a running score tab of how the terrorists are doing versus Jake. And he also meets Dr. Mutombo, who is a self-hating white professor
who teaches biology, which is Jake's major.
Right.
Yeah, so we get to know these characters, as well as the villain, Matthias, who is a former leftist himself. As a former student at Kelton, he felt sort of ostracized, much as Jake currently feels.
Right.
And eventually decided that, the 1% wealthy students don't deserve all the money that they have, so he's going to hold the whole campus hostage until the wealthy students' parents pay him several $1 million, at which point he will escape somehow and to somewhere else.
During this hostage situation, it's revealed that a underling of Matthias's is actually Natalie the entire time.
She is called Lucy in a singular scene where Matthias and Natalie are effectively alone with a bunch of underlings. Mm-hmm. And this is explained by a sort of weird explanation that we'll get into later, where supposedly Matthias was having them use code names.
For no reason.
For really no reason. It only serves to confuse the reader or hide from the reader the fact that Lucy and Natalie are the same person.
Right.
And heighten the drama in this one moment where Jake learns that all along Natalie was working with Matthias. He kind of fights his way up the library almost floor by floor.
And Jake's a big man. He's humongous.
He's a big man. We know he's a big man.
Because it's been said literally scores of times in this story.
He's big. What can you say? He's a stallion. At the end, he faces off with Matthias on the first floor, having gone back down. Of course, he kills Matthias, although he's also shot himself. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end, we find out that this bounty hunter named Dog, who had been sort of working...
He's not a bounty hunter.
He is a bounty hunter. He's literally a bounty hunter.
Oh my god.
He works for the government, but unofficially, and is paid. He's hunting for bounty.
Fine. Okay, he's effectively a bounty hunter.
Effectively, if not in title, a bounty hunter. Anyway, this sort of phantom figure has been working alongside, but not next to, literally, Jake, to free other parts of the campus where Jake cannot be. We find out that his name is Dog. He is a government contract shadow worker, aka bounty hunter.
Right.
We find out that he's related to Jake. He is Jake's uncle that Jake had previously mentioned died in an explosion. Mm-hmm. The novel ends as Jake and Dog reunite, and then Jake sort of joins Dog as his apprentice.
And, they walk off into the sunset.
And they walk off into the sunset.
The man who had been mouthing off at him was about to hit him. Jake reached up. His reaction was almost too fast for the eye to follow. The guy's right fist smacked into the palm of Jake's left hand. The man grunted as his fist's forward motion was stopped instantly and utterly. A little off balance because of that, he leaned toward Jake. Jake's fingers closed around the guy's fists and started to squeeze. The man's eyes widened. His mouth opened. Some of the color drained from his face.
"Oh,"
he said.
"Oh, balls."
His voice was thin and breathless with pain.
So, Andrew, why don't you tell me something you liked about William W. Johnstone's Trigger Warning?
What I liked about Trigger Warning was how little it demanded of me as a reader. Everything moves at a brisk pace. Everything's clearly telegraphed. There's a good sense of what's happening, what the stakes are. It's the literary equivalent of a popcorn movie.
Yeah, it's definitely a very brisk read. And it's almost paced like breathing. There's these scenes that inhale as we get ready for an action sequence, and then an exhale as Jake gets the shit beaten out of him by some Antifa thugs.
You know, there was that sense of repetition there, but I think what we saw is kind of a steady snowball effect.
Yeah.
Definitely we saved a lot of the big action for the latter 75% of the book, but just the fact that, like, you know, every consecutive scene there were more and more bad guys, and the stakes were higher and higher. More of the Kelton College students disliked Jake.
Yeah, and speaking of that big action sequence there at the end, I like that it doesn't waste a lot of time in getting to that. There's like a little bit of build up to the main threat of the novel, but then the main danger is this terrorist attack on Kelton.
Right.
And that it takes up probably over 50% of the book. So the fact that we're getting into the main conflict pretty early and getting to really live in that, I think, is a sign of good pacing.
I loved the motives of the terrorists. It fits really well with the theme. It fits really well with what Jake is thinking and what the world is presenting to us. You know, really, the novel is telling us that Kelton College is a lost cause. And for the terrorists to acknowledge the privilege that they come from and the fact that they're completely separated from the working class man is really interesting. It's one of those villains that makes you think. You're like, huh, maybe these guys are more like Robin Hood rather than, you know.
So much like Robin Hood. You remember that time Robin Hood like took a bunch of innocent students hostage and like threatened to kill them all?
Well, if you boil it down to the bare nub of the semanticalities, it's steal from the rich, give to the poor.
But he's not going to give to the poor, though, because we know that he was wealthy enough to go to Kelton on some kind of scholarship.
Scholarship.
So he had some money to begin with, and he's about to have several $1 million, and he's not going to distribute it.
Not anymore after Jake kills all of his cronies.
I just don't think that he's Robin Hood.
No.
I think that he's just a bad guy. But yeah, it's at least a complex motive. It's more than just a revenge.
Oh yeah, no, I was a little bit worried when like I realized that this was a terrorist takeover, but that there would be something like very intrinsically personal. Cal Granderson wronged me 20 years ago, and I'm getting my revenge. It's very broad. It's something that you can relate to.
It's broad and it's kind of political, and I think it serves to underlie the book's message that the left is insane and corrupt, because it's saying that like even the people who get out, quote unquote, of the left, like Matthias, still end up kind of crazy and vengeful. And it's saying that like these are the things that the left produces. On one hand, it produces these spoiled college students that we hate, and on the other produces these terrorists that we hate. And Jake gets the better of both of them.
Let's talk about that political bent. I see that as a positive. I mean, it's not something that I agree with politically, but again, boiling it down, taking away the liberal versus conservative labels on this, I enjoyed being in the boots of Jake Rivers because there's something very relatable about feeling like an outsider.
And yeah, I think maybe he wants his master's degree, sort of, just because he's a man of action. He wants to do something. He can't come home from the war and then just sit around and do nothing. You know? He's got to do something, so he goes to get his education. But yeah, I think it is probably fair to say that Kelton, if not disappointed him, then at least confirmed his fears.
But you can relate to that, can't you? Like, not fitting in and feeling like the world is against you.
I mean, on the most base level possible, yes.
Because this book operates on the most base level possible.
I would agree with that.
This is not literary fiction. This is genre fiction in capital G.
Yeah.
I mean, your mileage may vary, but being able to turn off the political part of your brain and be like, okay, this guy is being put upon by the environment that he's in.
But I don't think it's fair when you're approaching this book to turn off the political brain, because this book is asking you to engage with it on a political level. Every other sentence is some kind of dig at the left. The quote-unquote left, you know, what the novel perceives as the left.
Right. And that's kind of funny.
It is very funny.
It's entertaining to read because it's harmless because of how just ineffective it is. I never felt like my political beliefs were actually being lambasted just because of how incompetent the narrative is at, you know, confirming what Jake Rivers actually believes.
It's almost cute, but coming up on the the discussion that we're having today, I looked at the Goodreads reviews, and I was surprised how many presumably left-leaning people were getting angry at this book.
Yes.
Because the book offers, I would say, zero coherent challenges to actual like left-leaning ideology. And I think that's because it's not actually trying to.
No.
I think it's trying to confirm what a certain sect of the quote-unquote right believes by just sort of repeating a stock narrative.
Right.
It's not actually interested in challenging the left.
And to be a little controversial, the 1-star reviews on Goodreads were part of the entertainment factor for me. These people that took this on face value, like, clearly, Will, you don't actually believe the same things that Jake Rivers believes in. And I know this for a fact because knowing older conservatives, there is something of a telephone game going on. You hear, on the media, colleges care a lot about intersectional, international trans feminism. And then that gets bastardized another level by you see your grandchildren becoming liberal and you're like, oh, these crazy post-feminist fifth wave neo-Marxist. So it's a word salad, but this doesn't have a word salad. And I know this because, Will, you know how to use patriarchal microaggression in a sentence.
That's true. These sort of word salady buzzword phrases get used correctly. I don't think there's a single time that any of these things get misused like you would expect a sort of like socially isolated, hyper-conservative to misuse them.
There are leftists that can't use these words in a sentence.
Right.
And I know that an editor didn't do this because an editor didn't catch any one of the number of typos in this book.
Yeah.
If you're not catching typos, you're not going to be catching the political jargon that you use.
And I think a section that really illustrates that is the section when Jake is looking over the course catalog. And he's listing courses like, I don't know, intersectional, capitalist critiques of intersectional feminism, stuff like that. It's stuff that actually makes sense. Like, it could hypothetically be a real course, even though it's not actually.
Absolutely.
Just looking at the names of some of the courses listed in the catalog had him frowning and figuratively scratching his head. Gender, culture, and the U.S. national identity. Feminist critique of Christianity. Social justice and American racism. The psychological impact of male microaggression. Countering warmongering and oppression in American culture. Understanding multiphasic gender constructs. Jake had never seen such a load of useless baloney in all his life. Where were the regular courses? He flipped to the English section. Heteropatriarchy in American Literature. LGBTQIAPK Tales, a seminar.
Reading this book makes me feel like I'm in on a joke with someone. I was like watching Die Hard with a close friend.
I've never seen Die Hard, sorry.
Schlubby guy takes a tower back from terrorists who are holding it hostage.
Oh, like Skyscraper, the movie that The Rock was in.
Yes!
I also haven't seen.
Yes, like Skyscraper, the movie. The Rock.
So another thing I like about this book is that it's pretty breezy. If you look at it, it's about 400 pages, but I read it in about 2 sittings of maybe an hour and a half each. I had to do it 3 weeks apart, granted, because like I couldn't stand to look at it for too long. And then I needed like a detox period before I could finish it. But here's the thing. I was able to pick it back up 3 weeks later and jump right back in. I knew exactly what had been going on. And that's not because I'm some kind of memory wizard. It's because it's just very readable. Eminently readable.
Will, you have such a formula. Like, I can tell that you've written 200 books in your lifetime that is currently ended the time that you published this.
There are some places where I think the paint is starting to flake off a bit, and we can see this sort of cowboy story that's like, this story's bones are borrowed from a cowboy story, I think. Like, the part at the end when Jake and Matthias are having a shootout and the words "final shootout" appear on their own line in italics, as if it's like the text at the beginning of a boss fight in a video game. He wants to be called Stallion
by his uncle. He wants to be called Stallion by his uncle.
Yeah. There's definitely some weird eroticism in this book.
Joshua, What was your favorite part of the book?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that is probably the first date with Natalie.
Really?
When she just
I hated that part, dude. What?
Well, it's like so funny because it's so bad.
Okay, that's fair.
Well, I have to ask, have you been on a date before? Because the way this scene plays out is she just kind of like shows up at his dorm in a little black nothing dress that I think Norman would really appreciate. Norman, you little scamp.
You little scamp, you.
They go and get beers, and then Natalie asks Jake, you know, basically, what's your backstory?
Right.
In not as many words. And then he proceeds to like dump all of his trauma on her, including how his dad is a deadbeat and his uncle was killed by the mob. And then he doesn't ask her in return what her backstory is. And then they just kind of like leave.
well, he didn't do that because that would be a spoiler, because you can't have her say, oh, I'm a secret terrorist who's been tasked with killing you.
No,
and, you know.
But it would be a good opportunity for him to ask that and her to be like, oh, that's a secret. Because then we have this little thing called intrigue and suspense, which boosts this other little thing called reader engagement.
I don't care about any of those things. I just like, you know, fighting terrorists and dudes wielding guns.
Well, that's good because that happens after their date, I believe.
Yep.
On their way back. I also really enjoyed that scene because there's a great deal of sexual tension, which was very funny. Because you can tell by sort of the ethical bent of this book that there's not going to be any sex scenes. I mean, these terrorists don't even cuss, not even one time.
Really?
Yeah, they don't swear. So you can tell based on that they're not actually gonna have sex. Mm-hmm. There's that line where Jake alludes to the fact that, ooh, he's not celibate. How scandalous that is for a 20-something-year-old man to not be celibate. So I thought that was really funny, just because you can tell that Will and Joe, his co-author, are really walking this line, and they know exactly where the line is.
Right. It's kind of like when you read really old classical literature from like several centuries ago, and you just know this was the most scandalous thing in the 1800s.
It's a little quaint. It's also funny that it doesn't really go acknowledge that like she's a professor and he's a student who could conceivably be taking a class with her at some point.
Right.
And that's like not cool. But maybe that's part of the intrigue. You know, it's kind of sexy. It's like that student-teacher sort of dynamic.
Anyways. My favorite scene is probably when he first starts head hopping and he's in the mind of like the groundskeepers. And that's when Matthias first shows up with his team. And that's when like the stakes actually start raising, because you know there's this back and forth. You're like trying to gauge how crazy these terrorists are. Like, are they gonna kill these groundskeepers? They've already made them take off their uniforms and they're like kneeling there in their underwear. Stuff starts hitting the fan, and that's when I was like, okay, this is where the book is getting serious. Because at this point, I remember I was about to get bored with this book because I was getting tired of the repetitive, you know, black hooded figures attacked, Natalie romance scene. Like, I think the same thing repeated itself 2 to 4 times. Then we have this standoff, this hostage situation, and we're introduced to like the full extent of these people's like craziness.
Yeah.
I think that was fun.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that scene does a good job of sort of setting the stage for where the terrorists' boundaries are.
Yep.
Like, they're willing to kill innocent people. It shows that they're actually serious. They're ready to do what needs to be done to take down this school.
It's pretty efficient storytelling, too. We see in a couple subsequent chapters, everyone's like, oh, hey, side note about groundskeepers being in weird places. Oh, that's interesting. And it's a good use of like dramatic irony.
Yeah, it's decent. I think it could have been done maybe better, but it works.
The problem is like I started reading this book unironically just because I was so spellbound. I was just into it.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of the product that it is, it's where it needs to be.
Overall, structurally as a book, it's very clean. There's no denying that.
No
offense, Norman. Empress Teresa had some rough edges. But this reads like a complete and published book, which it is.
Yes.
And that's a big difference between this and Empress Teresa, is that like this is a book that like a publisher made and bound.
Right.
And it has like a summary on the back, and it has a cover with like stuff on it, not just a scary drawing of a lady.
Well, okay, I actually want to pick your brain about that because I agree with everything that you said, but I wonder who this publishing house is. It isn't a vanity press, but is it their personal publishing? Because I don't know about your copy, but there was some like serious printing issues. Like I mentioned, there were a lot of typos.
I didn't have any printing issues, although
really,
I have heard of other people having them as well. I think some Goodread reviews that I read mentioned that. But overall, yeah, I do lean towards thinking that they must have some sort of close affiliation with this press, although I didn't really do any research into it.
Okay. Because, I mean, I had, like, lines that were split, like, in the middle of the letters. They would start, like, veering off from each other. They would be really close to the margins.
I had, like, one page where maybe a line was kind of faded, but that was really it, and that sometimes happens in normal books, too.
Right, yeah, I was about to say. Okay, well, it's a mystery. I guess you'll have to tell us, Will. Or Joe.
Another thing I liked about this book was the physicality of the spaces in which scenes take place. You get a good taste of this right at the beginning. I'm not sure structurally this is the right place within the book for this, but we get Jake looking out his window and he describes Nafziger Plaza, the large park-like area in the center of Kelton College's campus. He describes where the library is. This is good because we know that like the physicality and the layout of the campus is going to be important when terrorists take over. Mm-hmm. It's also just good because it helps you get a sense of where things are taking place. Again, I don't think page 1 is necessarily the best place for this, but I like that it's there in general, and I like that it helps when it's done right before, for instance, a shootout. Mm-hmm. We kind of get a sense of where Jake can take cover. It's kind of like in a video game when you enter a new room and you get like a quick sweeping camera look across the whole space.
Yeah.
So you get an idea of what kind of pre-animated takedowns might be possible with that saw blade over there.
It definitely made it a lot easier to digest the action scene, and I appreciated that because normally I will skip over action scenes.
Yeah.
But I was into it with this one.
To be fair, Will and Joe, you guys do a good job of writing action scenes. I think that in a way that actually makes sense. I also tend to skim over action scenes, especially in books that are heavy in them, just because usually nothing happens on the screen that you actually need to know. Usually it's the result that's important. But in this case, I felt like the narration flowed right into the action a lot of the time. You'd be in the middle of an action scene before you even realized it had happened. Much like being jumped by a black masked terrorist in the dark.
And blessedly, they ended before I got too bored with them. So I think that was another contributing factor.
Conversely, there's places where I think that some of the locations being described are kind of unnecessary. Mm-hmm. We get described to us a smaller, unpaved path branched off from the main trail and led up a rise to an elevated point with several large slabs of rock on it. These rocks could be used to sit, and doubtless had been, more times than anyone could count. Jake and Natalie sat on one of them and gazed out over the mostly tree-bordered lake in the fading light. Like, this is from their first date. They go to a park, and they walk around, and nothing happens. And so this detailed description of a path is really not needed, especially because, like, the imagery isn't even particularly striking.
Right.
So it almost reads as if it had been written, like, and then they go to a park and it's pretty. Like, in brackets as if to say, like, fill in description here.
Dr. Alfred Matumbolt was lost, and not just in the physical sense. He had no idea where he was, he had no idea what to do, and he had no idea what was going to happen next. All he knew was that he had been crawling around up here in the dark for what seemed like hours, and it was only a matter of time before he did something wrong and died because of it. He was not cut out for this. Not at all. And making it even worse, he kind of needed to pee. Okay, so Joshua, we've established that this book has a lot going for it. Do you have anything where it didn't quite meet the mark? Any points where it wasn't as good as you think it could be?
Well, it's funny that you should ask that, because yes, I do actually. For instance, sometimes characters, and by sometimes I mean constantly, characters behaved in ways that I didn't feel were really like rational or correlated to any kind of actual real world human feelings.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Towards the end of the book, when the terrorists are taking over the library, and we keep getting these scenes where we're flashing back to like Pierce and his study group hunkered down in the library. There's this section where Fareed, who is the Muslim student in their study group, just blatantly tries to join the terrorists.
Yes.
And everyone's just kind of cool with that. So Fareed tries to join the terrorists, and then they turn him down because they're like, we're not going to give you a random student a gun, which, okay, rational. Yeah. Weird that you even considered it, but I'm glad that you decided not to. So then Fareed just like walks back over to the group in the middle of this hostage situation, and Pierce is like, hey, so why'd you do that? And then all of the students in Pierce's study group, the other students who watched Fareed, try to join the people that are going to kill them, start calling him an Uncle Tom for, siding with these white people, I guess.
Yeah, okay, so I think that scene illustrates two big problems with this entire narrative. The first is the blatant Islamophobia. And then there's this other problem where there's this weird conflict between the fact that these students of Kelton College are clearly hyperboles.
They're like caricatures.
They're caricatures. And so when you have this melding of a very serious situation and a very dramatic betrayal mixed with that element of caricature, the facade starts to fall apart. And I remember really not liking that scene, not only just because of the Islamophobia, just because also that was a moment where the joke went too far.
Sure. And it's almost Kafkaesque in the way it feels like dream logic.
Almost Kafkaesque.
Don't laugh at me for saying Kafkaesque.
No, almost Kafkaesque.
Okay, it is completely and wholly Kafkaesque in the way that it feels like dream logic, that these people would watch their friend try to join a terrorist cell that's going to kill them,
right? And
then they would gang up on their other friend who just critiqued their betraying friend.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you that it was at all logical. I just think it's the result of many different things that were put into this book reacting together in the wrong way chemically.
Yeah, you could say it's not intentional.
I would say it's not intentional. I think you're better than this, Will.
It's weird, too, because even the book seems confused about what the point of that is. Because if I remember right, they're calling Pearson Uncle Tom for critiquing Fareed because Fareed wants to join these terrorists that hate the 1%.
And are also actively threatening to kill them and have killed multiple of them already.
Right, and those students are also part of the 1%. Right. So, like, I don't know if maybe, Will, you were trying to get a sense across that these students have, like, self-loathing issues, which I think would make sense to a degree, but if so, it needs to be clearer, because I don't really think that comes across very well. And so when they start siding with the terrorists who they're simultaneously terrified of, it just doesn't make any sense, objectively.
I have trouble articulating this because I like Jake as a main character, and I think that he's a blank slate that is intentionally designed just to put yourself into his shoes. Something I wanted to see more of is some actual internal conflict of, am I really saving these people who have attacked me and called me a fascist and made my life miserable for the past couple months?
Yeah, you're right.
He's always like, oh, I can't believe I'm helping these guys, but he's never deciding whether or not to pull a trigger. He's not deciding whether or not to save someone when he has some other goal. There's never a moment where I'm like, okay, Jake is choosing his sense of heroism over his hatred of these people.
I mean, we get a sense that he hates the liberal student body, but we don't get a sense that he regrets in any way saving them or that he has any trouble doing it, which does seem kind of like a curious missed opportunity. Because if he saves these students, then there's more left-wing voters out there to destroy the America he so loves.
Yeah, and again, strip the politics. If you were in the position where you could save someone who you were almost certain would not do the same for you, unless you're a saint on earth, then you're going to struggle with this. And I think that would have been an interesting element to it.
Yeah. I mean, he gets assaulted by students on this campus for nothing more than walking down a hallway. So you would think that he would hesitate before saving them.
Right.
But he doesn't. He just does it. I guess that's because that's just the thing a real action hero man would do. On some level, this book is a power fantasy.
Oh, no, this book is a power fantasy.
So
action adventure is a power fantasy intrinsically.
So if we're being honest with ourselves, the white male readership wants to have the power over the people on the left, even if that means saving them. I can see a really conservative person reading this and thinking like, oh, well, of course I would save all these leftist snowflakes because it's just the right thing to do.
Right thing to do. I guess we really don't know what the right thing to do is, Joshua.
No, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Old habits died hard. When Jake heard the shots, his first instinct was to hunt cover, the second to return fire. But he didn't have anything to shoot back with. And in that split second when his brain began to process what was going on, he realized that he was more concerned with Natalie's safety than with his own. He lunged across the table, slid on the papers, knocked books and laptop aside and grabbed her. The impact toppled her chair over. She cried out in surprise. Jake twisted as they went down so that he hit the floor first and she landed on top of him, instead of the other way around. His weight falling on her might have seriously injured her. One thing that's kind of weird about Jake is that he acts like this sort of pulled himself up by his bootstraps, served in the military kind of guy, and yet he's at this college totally on the coin of his ultra rich grandfather.
Yeah.
So he hates these students who in some ways are in the exact same situation that he is. They just have different political alignments.
And I think that is the point of contention. I don't remember any interclassist points coming from Jake. It was always, they hate the government, they hate America, they don't like guns, they side with terrorists, whatever.
Sure, yeah. There really isn't much classism, which is a curious omission.
Yeah, especially when that's like the whole core conceit of your villain who's supposed to somehow reflect some aspect of your main character.
Yeah, he really doesn't play off Jake that well. I guess they don't have enough in common, which is a weird thing to say about a villain. They just don't really have chemistry. They don't connect to each other.
That's something that I was trying to touch on, is that the entire terrorist cell is a missed opportunity. There's so much you can do with the dichotomy between Matthias and Jake, or just the other characters. I mean, you told me once that like, oh wow, all these terrorists have very generic names. Like, there's a Hank and Carlos, and I know you haven't watched it, but something that this book invokes a lot, and names, is Die Hard. And what made that unique at the time is that all of these terrorists who were taking over the building had distinct personalities, had distinct backgrounds.
Yeah.
With every interaction, there was a new element because you were dealing with another person. I never felt like Jake was fighting another person. He was in a video game fighting faceless mooks, and then at the very end, Matthias is just a crazier, stronger one.
They might as well, the terrorists, just be like zombies. Or like Nazi zombies, because there's really no sense that like they have a family at home, that they have relationships with each other, that they have thoughts or desires or free will. They just act very much like they've been AI programmed.
Absolutely. And it's like seeing, like a half-built building, because like we mentioned, there is a very good base that these terrorists are standing on. Hypothetically, taking a lot of stuff out of the equation, the idea of stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, is relatable, is understandable at least, and nothing is done to humanize these people who have these values.
Yeah, and it's weird that they would go the step of humanizing these characters by naming them, but then not actually doing anything with their existences.
And killing them off one by one. A lot of whom were killed off screen by Dog. Let's talk about Dog a little bit, because I love this book, hate Dog.
Yeah, let's talk about Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Dog, because I was picturing Dog the Bounty Hunter. I saw this guy in a blonde mullet going through room after room of all these buildings in college, just shooting terrorists. There was nothing to him. He showed up out of nowhere. Like, I already didn't like the FBI people, because I really wished it were just Chief McCraney and Cal Granderson against the world. Because once the FBI comes in, I don't even remember these like FBI people's names. They were just there to add extra commentary and watch Jake and Dog do these inhuman feats.
Teresa Vega is the no-nonsense lady whose name I remember because of your seminal work, Norman. And then the other guy's name was Gregory.
But what did they add?
Oh, nothing. They show up and then they say, we're going to take over the situation now. There's tension between Teresa Vega and Chief McRaney.
Sure.
There's this sense that, like, they're going to take the glory from him, but also, like, there's a particular tension between those two, and it's like, is there some kind of, like, maybe romance or something here?
It never comes
But it never comes up
head.
again.
It never goes anywhere. And then on top of all of these two characters that you're already struggling to justify their existence because it's almost the end of the book and these people show up and the narrative is taken in no different direction. Chief McRaney just has more people to talk to. You add an old man who has this repetitive, it's supposed to be like a one line, just dog.
Yeah.
Just dog?
People ask
just
him
dog.
what his name is, and he says dog. They say just dog, and he says just dog, and then he shoots them.
The way they talk about him like he's some kind of like specter is kind of neat. I just like cool characters, and the promise of a cool character is really nice. And then the payoff to this at the end is that, oh, hey, I'm your uncle that was like not even directly mentioned but alluded to one time in a flashback.
It was on the date.
On the date.
Jake is like, oh yeah, my uncle was killed in an explosion along with his wife and kids or something.
And who cares?
Yeah, I really wanted Dog to be Jake's granddad, and I was kind of sad, just because Jake's granddad has been a character that like talks,
right,
and has been alluded to as a badass before, and so it would have made sense for him to actually show that.
I'm torn because it's obvious, but like nothing else was subtle about this book, so why not cram fan service into everything that you can here? Why not have cool granddad? God, it would be so awesome, Joshua.
And like, his granddad's kind of like his father figure anyway, so for them to then form this, sort of father-son-esque partnership and ride off into the sunset like it's some sort of Western novel.
Chef's kiss.
It would be like a viola, but that doesn't happen. And I think maybe I know why. Because of the way this novel ends, with so many loose threads, still loose.
Yeah.
It's definitely trying to sort of like gauge interest for a sequel.
Yeah.
And I assume that there's some other role for the granddad in the future.
I hope so. I mean, I get the idea of sequel teasing and I get the idea of cliffhangers.
Yeah.
It's just frustrating. I think there were just one too many.
It is frustrating because you can have a book that has, maybe a slight allusion to a possible sequel, but actually resolves all of the major plot elements.
Right.
This book doesn't do that because Natalie is left incapacitated. She's under arrest and like dying in the hospital.
Right.
And then they just leave her there.
Yeah. It's like the classic end of the movie. There's the pile of rubble and Matthias's hand juts out of it.
Yeah, and giving us so much backstory. I think the last like 10 pages or something are just Dog's backstory as Jake and Dog sit on a bench and talk. But it's not that it's a lot of pages, it's that it feels like a lot of pages.
More than is warranted.
Because everything else moves so quickly. To have this big action shootout preceded by a scene where sort of there's narration given that closes everything off and just reaches a sort of ending, and then have this almost epilogue-like scene where the characters sit on a bench and just talk is so painful. It's like an after-credits scene that goes on for like half an hour.
And speaking of loose ends, what did you think about Loose E?
Lucy doesn't make sense.
No.
In universe. The idea that Natalie would have a code name. Well, first of all, only she would have a code name because we know that it was Matthias's idea. She shouts that at him during the hostage situation, or she shouts that at Jake. She's like, oh, the code names were Matthias's idea. But she's the only one that has a code name, and they only use the code name when she's alone with Matthias and the other terrorists when they're getting ready to actually pull off the heist. So why are they using code names when they all know each other there? It doesn't make sense like diegetically, and it's obviously only there to stop the reader from catching on immediately that they're the same person.
Which I think is a mistake. Yeah. And you might disagree with this, but I personally am a sucker for dramatic irony. We have that scene of like Matthias at the gun range, and like to know that like Lucy is Natalie from the very first date that they have. You're questioning, like, how much of this is real? Like, does Natalie actually love him? Is she just planning his murder? Is she gonna put, like, poison in his beer? Regardless of what's on the page, is so powerful to me.
I'm not convinced that would work.
Why?
But what I do know is that this doesn't work. So I think it's worth a shot.
Why wouldn't it work? Why wouldn't it work?
I think it would be... Well, I was going to say it would be predictable, but the whole book is predictable, so... it would at least throw a sort of a wrench into everything. Like, we wouldn't know for sure if she's a double agent or a triple agent, how much of her feelings are real.
Right. Because, I mean, what isn't predictable is calling one character by two different names and never giving, like, any indication. I mean, you know, you could put a thinking cap on and be like, the one female character that has any agency is probably the same person. But it adds something.
I don't know. In the one scene where they call her Lucy, she doesn't even behave like the same person.
Yeah.
She's very, like, subservient and very timid, and she acts like Matthias's secretary, which is the only reason that I didn't guess that it was the same person, because it's, like, basically not the same character.
Right.
It almost makes me wonder if maybe that twist was added in later.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there was a plan for there to be a female terrorist, and then
I was about to say, do you think maybe Lucy was her own character?
Yeah, and someone decided it would be more interesting.
Hastily edited it.
Yeah. I mean, it really wouldn't be that hard to change, especially because it's just such a...
No, it wouldn't be that hard to change, but here, this is my same point. Control H on a word processor, Lucy, replace with Natalie.
Yeah.
Change nothing else. Cut out the part about the code names. You have a more interesting book in terms of dramatic irony, and you've done no work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not sure it would be as thrilling as you say, but I think it would be better.
Nothing I'm gonna say is gonna make this masterpiece more thrilling than it already is.
It's already a pretty good thriller.
We're talking about the terrorists a lot, and something that jumped out to me as a missed opportunity was that they were always aggressive towards Jake.
Okay.
And the reason I think this is strange is because of the proverb, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Mm-hmm. From the very beginning, there's no doubt about it, Jake hates Kelton College, and the students of Kelton College hate him.
Yeah.
There is no redeeming that relationship. That's just the paradigm.
Yeah.
Why did this group of people who were already going to go against the Kelton College students not come to Jake, at least indirectly, as a possible ally?
Yeah, it would have made some kind of sense for Matthias to try and recruit Jake. Mm-hmm. It definitely would have made more sense than the actual explanation we get, which is that Matthias sent the black-clad Antifa thugs. I think he calls them as a test for Jake. That's why we kept testing you. Which really doesn't make any sense, because if he's sending these thugs to beat up Jake, and Jake keeps winning, confirming that he's capable of taking down a bunch of trained terrorists, that's the time when you realize, oh, we just need to assassinate him and get him out of the picture.
So there's two different ways I think this could be approached. If we can keep them being aggressive at first, and Matthias is like, oh, we're testing you to see if you have it cut out to be one of us.
Yeah.
As the problems with Kelton College mount, there was this kind of general trajectory towards this all is lost moment, where maybe Jake's about to be expelled, or something's about to get him in real serious trouble beyond the help of his grandfather.
Yeah, that happens twice.
Sure, but it's not, it kind of gets hand-waved.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's
his grandfather pays off all the people that were going to sue. There's something gets caught on camera. We could have this point where, like, he's been beaten up, he's been put upon by Kelton College students, and then Matthias shows up to him, and he's like, hey, we hate these people too. You want to really stick it to them? But my first instinct would have been the very first part with the domestic squabble, where he's clearly just trying to help this girl and then gets ganged up on. That would be a perfect time for someone like, the friendly groundskeeper who had just started working at Kelton College came up to Jake and was like, wow, these people are really treating you unfairly. Don't you wish you could do something about it? Don't you wish you could really stick it to these liberals?
Yeah, I think that might be a bit early in the plot for something like that, but maybe then in that case just sort of switch around the order of the attacks. Like maybe night one at the college, Jake's on a walk and gets assaulted, and then later he tries to save them, just for the sake of pacing.
There's some adjustments you would have to do for pacing, but my point is that if Matthias has been trying to be this tempter figure, if he's been this devil on his shoulder, that ups his internal conflict, that ups the tension of the final battle, that gives more intrigue towards the beginning. there's a lot across the board that's going to be affected by this.
I agree, because Jake has a lot of reason to hate the students at Kelton. I mean, at one point he's just assaulted in the hallway for no reason.
For no reason.
So he has every reason, other than his ironclad sense of American right and wrong, to not want to help these students. In fact, to even get back at them.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the named minor characters. This is something we might have touched on already, is that I feel like a lot was lost on Jake's time to interact with them. By the named minor characters, I mean our three people that he, kind of fought with, Pierce, Cal Granderson, and Matumbo. I feel like they all came and went, especially during the tower takeover sequence, where
the whole book.
Well, sure, the whole book. But my point is that if we're trying to lead to the situation where people find common ground and people fight for a common good, there's not really a lot of work done to take these people. Pierce and Matumbo especially have never held a gun, and when Jake leaves them, they're still like, "Oh, I've never shot a gun before. I wish I were big and strong like you, Jake." I wish there were a chance for him to, like, if we are going to go with this message of conservative values and rugged men, I wish there were more of a chance where Jake would be like, proverbially or metaphorically, "You are a big man like me now."
Yeah, and a very big man.
A very big stallion of a man.
A big man.
And then Matumbo and Pierce are like, "Yes, I am a big man now.
I may not be as physically big as you, Jake, king of bigness.
But my heart is big."
My heart and my gun.
Right, my heart and my gun are big.
My gun that I know how to fire.
Right, there was never a moment about that. It was always like, "Oh, please don't leave me, Jake. I'm so scared and liberal."
I think it comes down to this book doesn't know what it wants to be about.
Sure.
Is it a book where the leftists get converted to conservatism, or is it a book where the leftists are irredeemable in the end, like they can't really be saved? Is that maybe why they don't grow as people, because they just can't? They're too emotionally stunted.
Right.
Because they're snowflakes, and when things get warm, they don't get stronger, they just melt.
But I think I can answer that question now. I think the answer is the second. They're not irredeemable. So we have two sources of liberal ideology in the book. There is the faceless masses that are caricatures of the university system today. And then there are our minor named characters where they're like, "Oh, I'm left-leaning, but I have some human thoughts that aren't just a caricature of what an old man would think a liberal thinks like."
Yeah.
And there's room in that for redemption. And I think that's built into that, because even before Pierce fully develops, I remember at his point of view, and especially Cal's a little crazy, but Cal too, they're like, "Oh, I'm liberal, but I also have XYZ beliefs that might be in common with Jake."
It's true.
We're hinted that these seeds are there for common ground.
Yeah, for
them
they never
to
quite
change
see it and become conservative.
Yeah,
and find the truth, quote unquote.
I feel like we just need more time per named character for them to interact.
Which is exactly why I think we need to cut down on the head hopping. There's several perspectives that can be cut entirely. Chief McRaney among them. We don't need to be inside his head at all.
That's fair.
He's honestly the big one. I think it should really be limited to Jake and Pierce.
Really?
Yeah.
You not even Matumbo or Cal?
No, because Matumbo serves the same purpose in a sense of plot. Both he and Pierce go through the same kind of character arc, where they're scared to hold a gun, and then they do hold a gun, and then they help Jake fight off the terrorists.
But one represents the system. He's part of the machine, and the other one's a product of it.
I guess, but is that more important than having characters with actual depth?
Absolutely not. Yeah. Absolutely
I think
not.
we need to have two strong characters as opposed to seven kind of okay characters.
Right. So I like that idea, and that's something I also thought about. Hey, let me propose something to you. What if Cal and Pierce became one character? We have this kind of highfalutin, a little bit unstable wannabe cop guy who, never really gets along with anyone. And he's the one that gets the recording of Jake showing that he was the victim in the situation. And there's this moment of common ground with them. The sacrifice, I think, would mean a little bit more, because I didn't really care when Cal died.
Me neither. I didn't care at all.
If Cal was someone who had, along, despite his flaws, helped Jake in the ways that Pierce did,
yeah,
and there was some element of relationship between the two that was less like, oh, you used to annoy me, and now we're fighting together, I think there would be a little bit more power in there. Plus, we get the added bonus of cutting the study group, particularly for Reed, which was just a source of Islamophobia.
Yeah, it really was just nonsense scenes with them. It was more just sort of like comical digs at a supposed caricature of the left.
A little bit.
It was really just bizarre more than anything. We get like descriptions of like, oh, the overweight purple-haired women students, which is like, that's just such a gross, like, stop that. Like, come on, guys.
Will,
are you better than this? I was going to say you're better than this, but I don't know.
The English club is better than this.
I really like the idea of combining Cal and Pierce for another reason. I like the idea on one hand of him being a left-leaning police officer because it provides an unexpected perspective.
Yeah.
He's not just a stock character. He's probably the least stock character in the book, and we can get into why a little bit later. But I like this idea that he's a police officer and he's combined with Pierce, because then there's another reason for him to sort of side with Jake. I mean, it makes sense for a police officer to become conservative because conservative policies tend to be very pro-cop.
Right.
So him becoming conservative would eliminate some of the cognitive dissonance he currently experiences about being left-leaning and a cop.
I was more intrigued of Cal's potential than his actual execution.
Yeah, there's a really cool part where it's really the only instance of actual internal conflict in the entire novel. We get Cal's backstory kind of dumped on us.
Yeah.
So he was raised by a liberal grandmother. He believed that cops are pigs, but he reached, a teenage age where he decided, I'm going to rebel against authority. But in his case, rebelling against authority was siding with authority because his grandmother was against authority. But he didn't become a cop until she had died, we find out, because he didn't want to break her heart. And then he says, he'd often felt like two people because he feels torn between wanting to be a cop and wanting to be liberal. And then he says, once everybody understood and accepted that the only people in this world who ought to have guns were the police and the military, and that the Second Amendment had to be done away with, he would have a Glock on his hip instead of some stupid handgun. So it's this really bizarre idea that, like, it's almost like the novel is saying the left wants a heavily armed police force and a heavily armed military and no guns anywhere else, which does not align with the left that I am familiar with in the real world, where the most left-leaning people would like there to be no guns anywhere, period. And
there are also leftists that want guns everywhere.
Yeah.
That's the whole problem of this being a book about caricatures, is there's a diversity in ideology that is completely unaccounted for here.
Yeah, it just rings of conservative conspiracy theory, this idea the left is trying to stir up this hyper-militarized police force to keep down all the independent Second Amendment gun owners.
Right.
I want to see it discussed more because it's so weird and interesting. I just wish that Cal got more than this one scene, because the next time we see him, he spends about 10 pages trying to get off the floor after being like knocked down by a terrorist. There's literally like a whole section of a chapter where he's just like trying to twitch his finger, and then he's like, okay, I can finally get up, and then he does, and the next time we see him, he helps Jake in a shootout and then dies.
Yep.
So there's no resolution. Well, we had mentioned earlier that there's some plot threads that get left hanging at the end. For instance, Agent Teresa Vega and her rivalry with Chief McCraney and with the other FBI officers.
I didn't even mention that because I just don't think it should exist.
Well, it shouldn't exist.
If you have some ideas for how to tighten it up a little bit.
Well, my idea was to get rid of it. Okay. But I think it's worth talking about because it's kind of sticky, because it makes total sense for Department of Homeland Security, the FBI.
Oh, absolutely.
Whatever word salad organization you want to throw in, it makes sense for them to get involved because an entire college campus has been taken hostage.
Right.
Okay, here's an interesting thought.
Okay.
What if the FBI shows up, they set up a perimeter around the town and the school, but they have determined that it's too dangerous for any new people to get on site because they're worried that the terrorists will panic and blow everything up.
Ooh,
so Chief McCraney is like, hey, FBI, where are you? We need your help. And then FBI is like, oh, sorry, Chief, you're on your own.
Yeah.
And that would actually raise the stakes because he's not equipped for that.
Joshua, that's genius. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I always knew I was a genius, but I'm glad to hear you say it.
The little like up and down, because you have this expectation, oh, the FBI is going to save the day. You might be disappointed. You might be excited about that as a reader. But to take that all away and be like, okay, it's mano y mano, just like mirroring Jake is so cool narratively.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, Chief McCraney doesn't have the resources to deal with it.
No.
So he's going to freak out. And maybe that leads to more tension. You know, maybe he makes a stupid decision, tries to get directly involved. And maybe that's a good place for Dog to enter if he's still going to be in the story. You know, he gets himself into a sticky situation. He tries to liberate a building all on his own. He's about to get killed, and then Dog, like, drops in like Batman.
Ooh, yeah. like a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, it would be a Deus Ex Machina, absolutely. But, I mean, it's already a Deus Ex Machina.
In a fun way. That's not inherently a bad thing to have one of those.
I mean, it kind of is.
Anyways, do you think anything more should have been done for Jake and Natalie's relationship in terms of that plot? Because she's mentioned kind of anticlimactically to be in a hospital under heavy guard, and then nothing else is said.
I mean, their relationship is so boring and so based on absolutely nothing that it's hard to suggest fixes for it. They have one date where, like I said, Jake just dumps his whole backstory on her and learns nothing about her in return.
No.
So I don't really know what their relationship is based on at this point.
Physical attractiveness?
Okay, sure. Let's give them something in common.
They have conservative values.
They have, but we don't even know for sure what her values are.
We have no
because
idea.
when she's talking about her values, she's still acting.
Right.
She's lying.
God, you're right, Joshua.
So we know nothing. We literally know nothing about her. I think we know less about her than if she had just said nothing, because now we have all these doubts about what's actually real.
Remember I was talking about, you know, there's the shot of the pile of the rubble, then Matthias's hand jets out. What if after we cut down the dog scene and then the epilogue is like he walks away and then Natalie shows up and she's like, let's get a beer, Jake, dun dun dun. Just, I want to see her again.
I guess it would be cool. I mean, she needs to show up again at the end. I think we can agree on that.
Because goes to her hospital room.
Yeah. In maybe some flowers. It's okay, so it's an after credits scene. So if the dog scene is an after credits scene, then there's more credits. And then at the end of the credits, a nurse walks into her hospital room and hands her some flowers. And it's like, who are these from? And then the nurse is like, I don't know, they just appeared. And then she opens a little card that's attached to the flowers, and what does it say? From Stallion.
No! God, that's so good.
And she doesn't know who Stallion is.
She has no idea. Well, he didn't know who Lucy was, so they got back at you.
Yeah, I guess. And then in the sequel, they can sort of resolve the fact that they're lying to each other.
Lucy and the Stallion is the
Lucy
name
and
of
the
the
Stallion.
sequel.
Exactly. I think what we see play out is Joe running out of ideas on the page. I think she probably realized when they reached the end of the story that there was nothing in their relationship, and so Lucy kind of, you know, lamely apologizes during that shootout, and then she gets shot herself. I called her Lucy, Natalie. And then she
did that in her own narration too.
Anyway, she gets taken to the hospital, and then the situation's kind of resolved. Like, she kind of apologized, and Jake kind of said it was okay. And so, like, a scene in the hospital would maybe feel redundant, but it also feels owed to us.
You can kill her.
Oh, that'd be good.
She's narratively dead.
Yeah, you're right.
Like, once sorry is said,
yeah,
the circle's complete. She can die.
She could totally die. But I think that's the reason she doesn't die is because she's going to come back in the sequel.
Okay, yes, and it's such a hard line to walk, because I know Joe and Will, that you guys are pretty career writers, so
yeah.
The idea that sequels are coming is your bread and butter.
Yeah, you can't miss the opportunity for a good franchise.
Well, then have it be her hand coming out of the rubble.
Okay. You're really obsessed with this image of the hand coming out of the rubble.
I just saw Carrie the other day.
Another thing that I thought maybe could use some work was Matthias's plan.
Okay.
So I don't think we did a super great job of covering this like in detail in the summary, so I'll go over it now. Essentially, his plan, as we find out, you know, during the hostage crisis, is to test Drake Rivers by having these quote-unquote Antifa thugs constantly attack him while he's on campus. He sends Natalie, aka Lucy, to keep an eye on him.
Right.
Then, to actually kick off the start of the plan, he and his crew dress as groundskeepers and plant explosives around the buildings, while secretly Matthias himself plants extra explosives around the library. He mentions having like extra C4 around. Then, discarding the groundskeepers' uniforms, various underlings will take over campus buildings, with Matthias himself and his closest allies taking over like the first floor of the library. Then they hold the hostages until they get the money from the government, and then they flee the country. There's a couple steps, particularly at the beginning, that I don't really think make a lot of sense.
Okay.
This idea of like testing Jake by having these supposed Antifa thugs like beat him up repeatedly is kind of nonsense, because if he's big enough of a threat that like he can consistently take down the like lackeys you're sending after him, he should really just be killed.
Right.
You have the resources to like get these black-clad people on campus.
Right.
You have the sway to make it seem like they're not sketchy in some way. And then clearly they have the guns to just kill him. The same thing goes for Natalie. Like, why is she keeping an eye on him? Like, what's the point of that? Assuming that there was a point, which I don't think there really is, it just does not make sense. Like, she doesn't even do anything to keep an eye on him, is what I'm getting at. Like, even if it made sense to keep an eye on him, she doesn't do a good job of it. She goes on like 2 dates with him, and the rest of the day he's going around unsurveilled, going to class and stuff. The beginning steps of the plan are really kind of nonsensical. Don't they say that the groundskeepers' uniforms are just like basically normal like overalls or coveralls or something?
Yeah.
And couldn't you just get those like anywhere? Like, they don't have to steal them from the groundskeepers.
There's something else to it at the end of it, where how are they going to get out of the campus? Do they have a helicopter? Do they have
I was also wondering this.
Okay, I get that like Matthias is crazy and he probably didn't really have too much of an escape plan.
Yeah, how is he going to escape? I mean, at one point Jake alludes to the idea of maybe getting hostages out with a helicopter, I think, by having a helicopter land on the roof.
Hostages out with a helicopter.
Right, so what I'm saying is presumably like you could also escape via helicopter, but it really doesn't make sense. Say the government wires Matthias this money, and then he has the money in his offshore bank account that he can't access because he's still trapped in the library, which is, set with charges that are going to explode.
Unless he has like mobile banking set up or something.
Yeah. He's using Zelle by BB&T.
Yeah.
To buy a helicopter on the spot.
Yeah,
so he can escape.
There's an Uber for helicopters. Did you know that?
Okay, well then that's how he's going to escape.
There you go.
You answered your own question.
We'll just acknowledge that or something. Give us something there.
Just ignore that there's like an Uber copter waiting for him. He ordered it for like 2 p.m., so he's like ready.
Right. Well, regardless of where he flees, the question is how he's going to start to get there.
Okay, but anyway, assuming that he does get on the helicopter or other means of egress,
right?
I think he has this plan in his head that he's just going to be able to sort of like escape, quote unquote, and then disappear.
Yeah.
But that every world government, or let's say he, gets in his helicopter, escapes, and then he goes towards Europe somehow by boat or plane or whatever.
Uber boat.
By Uber boat. The U.S. government is going to be like, hello, Europe. Just so you know, this wanted fugitive is coming your way. Like, Matthias is not going to be able to just disappear into the crowd like I think he thinks he is. He's going to be, public enemy number one in the most literal sense.
Right. Okay, so I have 2 follow-up questions to that. First, would any of these thoughts even be going through Matthias's head as a character who exists currently? And second of all, does this even matter? Because this is just a dumb action romp, a power fantasy for Jake.
I'll answer your second question first because I already forgot the first one.
Okay.
I think it does matter because the minute we say, well, X doesn't matter because it's just a power fantasy, that totally undermines our ability to critique really anything at all.
The first question is, would Matthias, the character that currently exists...
I think that he's not shown to be smart enough to think that, but we're told multiple times that he's smart.
That's true.
And so I think that the narrative wants us to believe that he's smart enough to have considered these details, but it seems to me as though the narrative itself hasn't considered these details. Like, I think that the Johnstones are trying to write this character that is a genius of some sort, but they didn't actually write a character that's a genius. They just told us that he is.
Of what a genius is.
They just told us he's really smart without actually grounding it in much.
Right. It's just such a delicate line to walk. You want it to be arch and silly and bombastic.
Sure, yeah.
But you don't want to take that suspension of disbelief too far.
Well, I mean, the James Bond franchise has been arch and silly and bombastic for dozens of years. And, like, it's been that.
Yeah.
James Bond has been believably a sort of shadow figure this whole time. Right. It's doable is my point. I'm not saying this should become James Bond, but it's possible to have a villain or a protagonist that is extremely theatrical in his master schemes, but still believably disappears off the public radar when he wants to.
Okay.
But Matthias is not that. He doesn't really seem to have thought his plan through very well at all.
So take that, and maybe we can leverage the fact that we have his point of view character.
Yeah.
And add an element to add improvisation into it. Maybe he didn't have time to plan out everything because something might have gone wrong on his end. Maybe he experiences some all is lost moment where it's like, if we don't have this heist now, it's not going to happen. And I'm struggling to come up with something that would justify that, but that would in effect be able to let you hand wave some of this, why didn't he think of XYZ eventuality?
For me, justify is the key word. If they lampshade the fact that something in his plan has gone wrong, for instance, say for some reason he didn't know Jake was going to be a problem, that would actually make a lot of sense. Like, if for some reason he didn't know that there was this student on campus who's like the badassest of badasses, then it would kind of make sense that like his plan has got a kink in it now.
That makes me really confused because I like that. I want there to be this element of interaction between Matthias and Jake, but like it would be almost equally as cool as if Jake is just this secret time bomb that he never expected and just threw a wrench in a whole thing. That would be cool.
That would be interesting as well, but I'm not sure it would allow the Johnstones to have their sort of conservative messages that they seem to enjoy threading throughout the narrative.
He could be the exception that proves the rule. He could be. It could be like a book of like, look at this crazy liberal man who's trying to hold a bunch of people hostage.
I don't think people are really capable. I think, as The Catcher in the Rye has proved time and time again, people, when you have irony on that high of a level, people consistently miss it.
That's fair.
I mean, if you look at the Wikipedia entry for The Catcher in the Rye, you'll see mentions of all the serial killers that have used that book as justification for their actions. When really the point is that you shouldn't identify with Holden Caulfield.
That's fair.
But time and time again, serial killers do identify with him because he's kind of sociopathic. And I think that people who misinterpret that novel easily think it's a justification of inhuman actions, when really it's meant to be the exact opposite.
Okay, see, you actually had a response to this. I was just going to mention that they made a version of Twilight from Edward's point of view. So clearly we're operating on completely different wavelengths.
Clearly we are.
One of those allies Matthias Foster still had on his side was Natalie Burke, or Lucy, as Foster had called her. Jake couldn't help but wonder how he had gotten her to fall for his line. Then he realized it didn't matter. No matter what had happened in the past, Natalie was the enemy now. He had no doubt that she would kill him without hesitating if she got the chance. The question was, could he do the same? He honestly didn't know the answer. Joshua, we gave Will and Joe a lot to think about, so heart of the matter time. Can we give a final thought, something that Joe can take home?
So my final thought on this is, it's harder to critique this than something like Empress Teresa, because to me it ultimately doesn't feel like it's really trying. I know you've stated that you feel like it's a troll fic, and so it's trying to be a sort of satire. It's hard to critique because it doesn't feel like it put in enough effort to really merit a serious discussion.
I guess so. I just had so much fun with it that I wasn't trying to elevate it past, maybe having a clearer message, a clearer theme, a little bit more winking if that's what it's going for.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle to come up with anything that would deviate it from that path. I think to try as hard as Norman, you tried with Empress Teresa, would do a disservice to the entertainment value of this book being this stupid popcorn movie.
It is just a popcorn movie. Like, you don't talk about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's Skyscraper the way you talk about Jurassic Park, because Skyscraper's not trying to do anything.
I think we've reached the end of our meeting today. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Will, for your legacy and leaving behind this book that I thoroughly enjoyed, no matter what Joshua tells you. If you guys liked this episode, please share it with your friends. Follow it on whatever streaming services you might be using. We're on Instagram at English Club Podcast. Thank you to our friend Benjamin Davis for the music. And we will see you all at the next meeting.
See you, Norman, Will, Joe. Hope to see you again. He stood up and started walking along the concrete path at the edge of the plaza. Jake fell in alongside him. The tide of campus life ebbed and flowed around them. After a moment, Jake said, "Dog, that's your code name, right?"
Yeah.
"Do I get a code name?" Barry squinted over at him, said,
"You're as big as a horse. How about horse?"
"No," Jake said, shaking his head. "Not horse. That's not a good code name." He thought about it. "Now, stallion, maybe."
I don't think so.
Barry clapped a hand on his nephew's shoulder as they walked off into the pleasant autumn afternoon.
We'll work on it.